Let's talk some chess. This is the final game of the Bullet Chess Championship on chess.com. The final has two very familiar faces, Magnus Carlsen and Hikaru Nakamura. Pretty interesting rules in the final. So to get to this point, it was a double elimination tournament. Magnus actually lost to Firouzja and was in the loser's bracket, and then battled his way back to face Hikaru in the final. And sort of the way it works is it's a 45-minute match, so they basically play as many bullet games as possible. Bullet meaning the time increment is 1 minute plus 0, so you have a minute to play and you don't get any extra seconds per move. So very, very fast game. You just have a minute to play, no more. You play for 45 minutes. You get a point for a win, half a point for a draw, 0 points for a loss. And if at the end of 45 minutes, one player is up by 2 or more points, then that player wins. So you basically play for 45 minutes, you play a ton of games, and then whoever, if you're up, you win. This game, or this match, incredibly, went to overtime because at the end of 45 minutes, neither player had a 2-point lead. So I won't tell you the score of the match right now because it'll sort of spoil. But this is in overtime, and this was the decisive game of the tournament. This was the game that crowned a Bullet Chess champion. So let's get right into it. We had Magnus opening us up with e4, g6 by Hikaru, knight to f3, and bishop to g7. So pretty normal stuff. Definitely not the most classical chess we've seen where you play g6 and fianchetto your bishop on the second move, but it's bullet and people are trying sort of different things, and a lot of times you might just be trying to flag your opponent with the black pieces, so make your opponent run out of time. So all sorts of different strategies in bullet chess. d4 by Magnus, taking control of the center. d6 by Hikaru. I should note that this pawn is, of course, attacked by the bishop, but it's defended twice by the knight and the queen, so no worries there. Bishop to d3 by Magnus, knight to f6, so coming with an attack on the e4 pawn, which is defended for now by the bishop. And Magnus just castles kingside, followed by Hikaru. We have h3, preventing Hikaru's bishop from coming to g4 and sitting on g4, pinning the knight to the queen. So h3 prevents this. Now knight to c6, eyeing this d4 pawn in case this knight ever has to move from f3. So pretty nice knight work from Hikaru. These two knights are attacking these two pawns and essentially forcing this bishop and this knight to stay on their squares and stay in defense of these two central pawns. We have c3 by Magnus, so allowing this knight now to move away from the defense of the pawn if it so chooses, and e5 by Hikaru, finally striking in the center. Rook to e1 by Magnus, getting the rook on the all-important e-file. Rook to e8 by Hikaru, matching it. And now knight b to d2, just developing naturally and connecting these two knights. b6 by Hikaru, perhaps preparing to fianchetto his light-squared bishop. Knight to f1, rerouting the knight maybe to some important squares on the king side. And now fianchetto bishop here on b7. Knight to g3, a6, these are all very normal moves. Bishop to e3, and h6 by Hikaru. And this was the first sign of weakness in Hikaru's position. Here, instead of h6, you want to capture on d4, just sort of unclog the middle where Magnus has these two strong central pawns. Oops, sorry. So e takes d4, c takes d4, and then knight to b4, attacking this bishop on d3. Here, you can ignore the attack because the queen is defending the bishop and just play d5, which severely hampers this fianchettoed light-squared bishop that Hikaru has, but now just c6, and after d takes, knight takes, you have a very similar position for Hikaru, but you've removed one of Magnus's pawns, central pawns on d4. You have a semi-open e-file with a rook on it, and this is better than sort of what happened. But instead, Hikaru played h6, I guess looking for a move and maybe just trying to improve the pawns around his king, but generally you don't want to move pawns in front of your king, and Magnus jumps right into it with queen to d2. And now Magnus has a battery with the queen and the bishop, eyeing this h6 pawn, which is only defended once by Hikaru's bishop, so Hikaru has to play king to h7, and now this pawn is defended twice by both the bishop and the king. So now we have d5 by Magnus, and again, this is why you'd like to get rid of this pawn on d5, because now these are two great central pawns. Obviously, this attacks the knight on c6, so Hikaru saves it with knight to b8, but we can sort of feel Magnus just pushing all of Hikaru's pieces back, forcing the knight back to its starting score on b8, which is never very good, and now Magnus has c4, really solidifying this central pawn structure and locking this bishop in. Knight to d7 by Hikaru. He didn't want to leave it on the back rank for long. and now b4 by Magnus, preventing the knight from coming to c5. So this would be a great square for the knight, but now the knight cannot go there because then the pawn would just capture on c5. a5 by Hikaru, and here just a3 by Magnus, just meeting pawn move for pawn move. So obviously the pawn is threatening b4, which would allow the knight to get to c5. So Magnus just plays a3, and now if pawn takes, and the knight still cannot come to c5. And that's actually exactly what happens. Pawn takes, and now there's no knight to c5, and that's all good. So instead we have c5 with the pawn, so putting the pawn on this square, but now b takes, c takes on c5, and now queen to c2 by Magnus. A bit of a waiting move. Magnus maybe just content to, he has these nice pawns and his king is slightly safer, so maybe waiting to see what Hikaru will do, and Hikaru simultaneously sort of waits for what Magnus will do, gets the queen off the back rank and plays queen to c7. Here we have h2 by Magnus, improving the position of his king. Rook takes on a1, rook takes on a1, and now rook to a8, trying to battle for supremacy of this open a file. We have rook takes on a8, bishop takes on a8. This bishop still not very good because it's not pinned, but locked in by these powerful pawns. And queen to a4 now. So a really nice queen move. Maybe this was the idea that Magnus saw when he wanted to bring his queen to c2. The queen can come to a4, which attacks the bishop on a8, and also eyes, the bishop is undefended, so that's important, and also eyes this knight on c7, which is currently defended by the knight and the queen, but a nice little fork by this queen on a5. Hikaru deals with this and plays bishop to b7, getting the bishop out of harm's way. But now bishop to d2 by Magnus, preparing ideas of bishop to a5 with an attack on the queen. We have knight to b6, attacking Magnus's queen on a4, and now even queen to a7, getting the queen deep into Hikaru's position, now pinning the bishop to the queen and also attacking the knight. So again, forking these two pieces and pinning the bishop. Even though they are both currently defended by the black queen, but now the black queen must stay on c7 or the pieces will fall. We have knight to c8, once again attacking Magnus's queen, so the queen has to move, and we get queen back to a4. Here, Hikaru goes for a queen trade. He plays queen to d7, allowing if queen takes, then knight takes back. Hikaru is playing with the black pieces. He's facing this really nice pawn structure that's locking his bishop in, and he would be happy for a draw here, but Magnus says, no, I like this position. I'm going to play queen to a5 instead. We have bishop to f8. Again, both of these bishops are really just locked in by this sort of pawn obstruction here. And it's not like Magnus's light squared bishop is very good, but I'd still rather have this bishop with ideas of c2 to a4 joining in the attack, and then this bishop, which can't really do anything, and this dark squared bishop, which also is going to take a lot of squares to get it to a relevant position on the board. So now c3 by Magnus, just improving the position of this bishop, and now bishop to e7. So really just trying to get this bishop somewhere where it will matter. We have knight to d2, moving the pieces closer to these open two files and hoping to sort of infiltrate Hikaru's camp, and now bishop to d8. So, you can see this idea from the start. It's just never good when you have to sort of waste 3 moves to get your bishop into the game, but at least now it's attacking Magnus's queen on a5. Here we have queen to a1, and you're going to start to sense a bit of a shift in the game. Hikaru's position is certainly cramped, but even though it took him 3 moves to get this bishop to d8, Magnus didn't really achieve anything in those 3 moves. These bishops and knights aren't doing much, and all of a sudden Hikaru is going to start to win back some space and make this game feel a bit more equal. So that starts with knight to b6, which is a really nice move. It's a great square for the knight. It's attacking these 2 pawns. Of course, the d5 pawn is protected twice, but more importantly, you're attacking this c4 pawn, which again is defended by the bishop and the knight. But if you're able to capture this pawn eventually, that's great because then you have a passed pawn on c5. And here Magnus just plays bishop to c2, actually abandoning the defense of this pawn because it's still defended by the knight on d2. But now this knight has to stay in defense of this pawn, so a nice square for Hikaru's knight here on b6. Queen to c8 by Hikaru, and now f4 by Magnus, trying to achieve a breakthrough on the king side. we have e takes on f4, and now bishop takes on f6. So this was the idea. This pawn is sort of pinned to the knight. So once the pawn takes, then the bishop can take the knight on f6. And now, instead of bishop takes back, first a nice intermezzo by Hikaru. Pawn takes on g3, and this comes with check, so you have to deal with it. We have king takes on g3. And now even, instead of taking the bishop, improving the position of the knight to d7, attacking the bishop, and preparing potentially to go to the king side. We have bishop takes on d8, queen takes back on d8, and now knight to f3 by Magnus, queen to e7 by Hikaru, now eyeing this pawn on e4, which is defended by the bishop, but now you have to be careful about that if you're playing with the white pieces. We have queen to a7, attacking this bishop, which is undefended, so a nice move. And here, Hikaru plays knight to e5. So again, a nice rerouting of the knight. Now the knight comes to e5, where it's quite strong. It's on a central square. It's preventing this pawn from advancing anymore. It's attacking the undefended c4 pawn, which is excellent. It's also, offering an exchange of knights. And you'll note that Hikaru's defended his bishop with a discovered defense. When the knight moved, the queen is now defending the bishop. So that's all well and good, although the bishop now is pinned to the queen. So important to keep an eye on that. Here we have king to f2 by Magnus, and this was actually the position, or the move, where the position started to go downhill for Magnus Carlsen. What you want to play here is just knight takes on e5, trade off the knights, queen takes with check, so you don't have to worry about the bishop just yet, queen takes with check, king moves, and then queen to b2. And this might have been the move that Magnus didn't see. I think in this position, it's a little bit scary, because if you move the bishop away, then, let's say you try to retreat the bishop, then you get queen takes on f7 with check, and this doesn't look very fun. But the move that Magnus had to see, maybe he didn't see. I'm sorry. Wait. Is that? Yeah. The Magnus that the move that Magnus didn't see, or maybe didn't see, is Hikaru playing queen to. Sorry, that might have been confusing. Hikaru playing queen to b2, and this is a really nice move. It simultaneously attacks this bishop on c2. It pins the bishop to the king, and it protects your own bishop on b7, which is under attack from the queen. So wait, I'm sorry. I'm being confusing. I'm so sorry. This is the move that wait. I'm confusing myself now with all these lines. Yeah, this is totally fine. This is totally fine for Magnus. He might have seen. I'm sorry. He might have seen this move, but he might not have liked this position. Is what I meant to say. I'm looking at my notes and I'm mixing everything up. He might have looked at this position and said, "Okay, I don't want my bishop to be pinned. I don't. This bishop is now. This bishop is now." Protected, and I don't want to go into this. I'm going to try something else. I think here you have to put the queen on a4, protecting this bishop, but maybe Magnus didn't want to go into this. Instead, he plays king to f2. That's what I'm trying to say. And now you just get knight to c4. So instead of going into this position where you have the queen pinning the bishop and protecting the bishop on b7, instead of going into that position, Magnus sort of prevents that, but allows knight takes on c4, and now Hikaru has created a passed pawn on c5, and that's going to be a troubling passed pawn for Magnus to deal with, which we sort of alluded to earlier. So now bishop to d3, obviously attacking the knight, but the knight just moves to b2, now attacking the bishop on d3. So bishop to a6, attacking the pinned piece. Again, this bishop is pinned to the queen, so kind of tricky to see how Hikaru will get out of this, but he gets out of it brilliantly with knight to d1 check, forcing the king to move. King moves to g1, and now queen to e4, gobbling up another pawn and saying, I'm giving up this bishop on b7. So what Hikaru is going to do is he's going to give up a bishop, but he's going to get a bunch of pawns and hopefully push those pawns, promote them, and win the game. So the queen has to take the bishop, of course. It also defends the pawn on d5. But now Hikaru has queen to e3 with check, king runs to h2, and now queen to f4 with check. And this was the other sort of critical moment in the game. If Magnus just keeps moving the king back and forth, this would likely be a perpetual and would lead to a draw, and they would continue playing, and whoever gets a decisive advantage would eventually win. Maybe Magnus sees another way to get out of this and doesn't like this perpetual draw. Instead of bringing the king to g1, he plays king to h1. And the problem with this move is it allows knight to f2 with check, getting the knight into the attack, and now things are not looking very good for Magnus. You have one square for the king to move to, it's g1, so king to g1, and now knight to h3 with check. Looks like a knight sacrifice, and it is, but after pawn takes, we have queen to g3 check, king to f1, and now queen takes knight on f3 with check. So now if we do a quick material check, Magnus has this bishop, but Hikaru has 3 pawns for the bishop, so technically the material is equal if you add up the numbers, and Hikaru is going to try to use these pawns and turn them into queens, which is very possible because Magnus's king is very unsafe and is going to run into all sorts of annoying checks. So here we have king to e1 by Magnus, queen to e3 check, and now bishop blocks on e2. So this bishop, which is essentially Magnus's piece advantage, is now not achieving anything because it's just being used basically as a pawn to block the queen from the king. Queen to c1 check, king to f2, queen to f4 check. I should mention at this point Hikaru's up on time, so he'd be happy to flag Magnus and have Magnus run out of time, and Hikaru wins just as much if that happens. King to e1, king to c1 check, king to f2, queen to f4 check, king to e1, so sort of just a couple moves back and forth, and now c4 by Hikaru. And now all of a sudden this pawn is looking very threatening. The bishop, this is sort of, the bishop is eyeing the square, but obviously the bishop can't capture because then the queen captures back, and that doesn't work. And now the bishop can't come to d3 to protect the c2 square, and it's going to be tough to prevent this pawn from promoting. So Magnus tries, of course. He plays queen to b6. I think I actually don't know the idea behind this move. Maybe he wants to get... Actually, maybe he's, wants to threaten picking up the d6 pawn in case the queen moves away and then, promote a pawn of his own. But this was really, really the losing position for Magnus. In this position, you have to play, you have to give up the bishop and play bishop takes on c4. Oh wait, I'm sorry. That's the line I just did. No. That's not what you want to do. Oh my gosh, I'm sorry. I feel like I'm confusing everyone. Yeah. Wait a second. Just ignore me. Yeah, just ignore me. They kept playing. Here we have c3 by Hikaru, so Magnus didn't achieve anything in stopping this pawn. Now queen to c6, getting behind the pawn on c3, but queen to d2 with check, and now Hikaru is running out of options. We have queen to f2, c2 now even by Magnus, and now there is just no way to stop this pawn from promoting. I'm going to see what the last move of the game was. Yeah. Okay. So it's looking very difficult to stop this pawn from promoting. Magnus tries in desperation, queen to c7, perhaps threatening this f7 pawn with check, but now Hikaru just finishes the game beautifully with queen to f4 check. And in this position, Magnus resigned, lost the point, and Hikaru went up 2 points in the match, which means Hikaru won and is named the 2023 Bullet Chess Champion. So let's talk about what this move means. Of course, the queen is checking the king, but more importantly, the queen is guarding the c1 promotion square and is guarding this f7 pawn, so Magnus has no queen checks to sort of counter what's going on here. So whatever happens, if you block with the king, or if you move the king or you block with the bishop, your next move is promoting to a queen on c1, and then essentially Magnus has to trade, and now this is just an insane material advantage for Hikaru, and the game is over. So a really nice, I probably should have stopped and asked if, to find this move, a really nice queen to f4 check, both defending against the counter, checking the king, and protecting the promotion square on c1. So a very well-deserved win. Magnus was talking about Hikaru after and just said he was amazing, and said it felt like it was playing an engine. And I think this was back-to-back wins for Hikaru in the Bullet Championship. So he wins $20,000, which is awesome. Don't feel too bad for Magnus. He wins $16,000. But definitely an amazing game, and kudos to both players. So a great tournament overall. Thanks so much for watching. Drop a like, drop a subscribe. Let me know if there are any other games you'd like me to review, and we'll see you next time.